the
Kiwi
state
buy and Kiwi
housing,
build.
we have, you know, like, they can't do everything all at once, much like various other governments can't just solve everything in one fell swoop.
They can be a lot more ambitious, and they're failing to do that because of their nutty adherence to a 20% net debt target, which no one in the rest of the world believes in.
We've had this conversation before.
I know, and sadly, it is the core of everything. It's the reason the government is not doing a lot of things.
You mean the running the not deficit? What am I trying to
The 20% debt target is the key restraint here.
Okay.
But I mean, so the government should be doing a lot more, and a lot more at that bottom end as well.
The rent to own thing seems to, you know, if there's some schemes like that already to expand them and put them in there, right?
Roald Dahl stories seem, if anything, even more popular since he died, and they're used by New Zealand educators. Here he is.
The animal I really dig above all others is the pig. Pigs are noble, pigs are clever, pigs are courteous. However, now and then, to break this rule, one meets a pig who is a fool.
Are you Roald Dahl fans?
Yeah, I knew that off by heart. I can't remember which one I knew completely. I think it was like Sleeping Beauty. I knew completely off by heart. I loved the revolting rhymes.
I am a huge fan and have been to his home and had a look at his place where he did all his writing in Britain. Amazing man, fighter pilot, extremely tall,
very funny,
enormously interesting character.
Plans to commemorate Roald Dahl with a special edition coin from the Royal Mint have been scrapped. Two reasons. One, perhaps a smokescreen. He was not, says the Royal Mint, regarded as an author of the highest reputation. That's one reason why the new coins will celebrate the lives of William Shakespeare and Beatrix Potter instead. The other reason is his anti-Semitism. He said things about the Jewish race that were fairly unconscionable, and most commentators today seem to agree with the Royal Mint's decision. Do you?
Shakespeare was just as bad, to be honest.
I know, it's like Shylock.
There's whole plays about, you know, that expose him there. And Beatrix Potter, you know, I'm sure you could find some views from the time that would be dodgy. I think this is nuts.
I don't think it's nuts. I think what he said was pretty reprehensible, that Hitler must have known something. You know, he put it like that, you know, even somebody as horrible as Hitler didn't choose the Jews for no reason.
Well,
it is a terrible thing to say.
He also fought as a fighter pilot in the war against Germany and was very badly injured in a crash. So I don't think that he was one of the great anti-Semites who needs to be treated like this.
I think that you can commemorate someone for their great literary endeavour without necessarily putting them on a coin, is how I feel about him. Though I do think comparing it to Shakespeare is interesting with the whole Shylock situation. Yes. But he is a genius writer, so I don't know about this not great.
Yeah.
Psychology Today, speaking of Shylock, says you have to suspend judgment and accept Shakespeare's greatness, despite making Shylock convert to Christianity. So maybe it is Roald Dahl's lack of sufficient greatness.
I think it's the lack of time.
Sticking point.
It's like, you know, World War II refugees. In the past, it's fine. So Shakespeare's so long ago that we can forgive it, but Roald Dahl's not that long ago.
I'm sure a lot of these men would have, you know, people like him and Ezra Pound and Kingsley Amerson would have offered defences and would have pleaded context. Would you rather know what they actually thought rather than have them hide it all under a bushel? Is that what you think?
They've left their answer phone messages out for everyone to see.
Yeah. Penny Ashton's been on the panel today, and so has Bernard Hickey. Thank you for your comments and expertise.
Thank you very much.
Both of you.
Especially his expertise.
No, both of you.
My opinions.
Had a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun.
We're back tomorrow. Thanks for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint is coming right up.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, US politics 24 hours on, and is it a case of a severe midterm election hangover? A testy President Trump fires up, telling more than one journalist to sit down and effectively be quiet. The epic press conference ended with a respected White House journalist being stripped of his credentials. The president's press sec alleges the reporter manhandled a White House intern. Cue a Twitter spat. We'll give you a frame by frame of what actually went down. And if that's not enough, US Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been quietly helped out the door. We cross live to America for the latest. At home, it's been a miserable day on the West Coast. We'll report from there.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batana ho. The Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway has admitted he did not read the entire file when he was making his decision to let the convicted drug smuggler Karel Schubeck stay in New Zealand. Immigration officials are investigating what was in the file they provided to Mr Lees-Galloway after new information came to light that he said he did not have when he made the decision. National has been demanding the minister stand down, saying it's obvious he didn't do his job. Mr Lees-Galloway says it took him about an hour to come to his decision.
I was presented a summary of the file. We went through that. I looked at different aspects of the file. I asked questions about the file.
Ian Lees-Galloway says he has since read the full file and stands by the decision he made on the basis of the information provided. An investigation has failed to identify who leaked a report into the former Minister Meka Whaitiri's alleged bullying. The Prime Minister called for an inquiry into the leak of the edited report by the Department of Internal Affairs, which found it was probable Ms Whaitiri grabbed her Press Secretary's arm, leaving it bruised. Jacinda Ardern stripped Ms Whaitiri of her ministerial responsibilities after losing confidence in her following the altercation at an event in Gisborne in late August. Deloitte was commissioned to conduct a forensic investigation into the leak, but found no evidence that Internal Affairs staff were responsible or that anyone else was at fault. The inquiry did highlight inadequate security and access controls and a deficient editing process. The father of an Auckland woman killed in her home last year has told a jury he found his daughter in a pool of her own blood. Arishma Chand was stabbed to death in Manurewa last November. Rohit Deepak Singh was charged with murder 3 days later. He's pleaded not guilty and is on trial in the High Court at Auckland. Today, Ms Chand's father, Rakeshwar Singh, told the jury his daughter called him 15 minutes before he arrived home. He said she'd been worried about a disturbance outside the house, but when he and his wife arrived, she didn't come out to meet them.
I ran towards the door. I ran to the house and to Arishma's room, and I saw Arishma lying on the floor with a pool of blood.
Rakeshwar Singh, whose daughter was killed in her Auckland home last year. A class of Otago Boys High School pupils has been stranded in Mount Aspiring National Park after heavy rain made a creek impassable. The school takes Year 9 and 10 pupils into the Matukituki Valley each year. The 26 boys and 3 staff were due back today, but the hut they're staying in was cut off. The Deputy Rector, Mark Hooper, says the boys are safe and in high spirits.
I spoke with one of our more experienced outdoor education teachers earlier who's had about a 30-year association with the lodge, and he has said this is the first time he's known a class not to be able to leave the lodge on the day they're supposed to. So it's like a one in a 30-year event, but it's something that we plan for, and everybody is safe and there's plenty of food, most importantly for the boys.
Mark Hooper. The group will come out of the valley tomorrow if the weather permits. And heavy rain is still hitting the west coast, with rivers reaching high levels. State Highway 6 is likely to remain shut overnight from Fox Glacier to Hukatika because of flooding and slips. State Highway 73 remains shut at Arthur's Pass. School children in Harihari have been taken home by the police. The authorities are warning of heavy rain in Canterbury overnight, but no significant flooding is expected. Further north, the Remutaka Hill Road north of Wellington has just reopened after being closed most of the afternoon by high winds. There's also a strong wind warning on the Desert Road. Ratana church leaders are keeping the legacy of their leader alive. Today marks the 100th anniversary of Tahupōtiki Wiramu-Ratana's starting the faith. Several thousand people gathered at the marae this afternoon for the main church service. Sarah Jane Ahipene Wall grew up in the Ratana faith and says her mother, who's passed away, was a strong believer.
It's good to bring her mokos home and let them experience the maramatanga and what's happening here. Well, it's been a big part of my life, so I just let the kids make their own choice, but make sure that they're involved and know what's available.
Ratana follower Sarah Jane Ahipene Wall. It's 5:04. Sport. North Harbour prop Carl Tu'inukuafe will start for the All Blacks against England at Twickenham this weekend after Joe Moody was ruled out for the rest of the European tour with a split eyelid. The All Blacks have just named their team with Cody Taylor at hooker, Brodie Retallick at lock, Aaron Smith at halfback and Damien McKenzie at fullback. Sonny Bill Williams and Jack Goodhue are in the midfield, and coach Steve Hansen is keen to see how they play in one of the biggest tests since the last World Cup.
We just got to work out what are the good combinations, what combinations really gel well together, and he's trained the house down, so people go, well shit, this is a big test, but that's the best time to find out.
Steve Hansen. The Pakistan cricket captain Sarfraz Ahmed has criticised the Black Caps batsman Ross Taylor for making a disgraceful throwing gesture when facing Mohammad Hafiz during their one-dayer in Abu Dhabi this morning. Taylor appeared to query the bowling of Hafiz, whose action has been deemed illegal by the International Cricket Council several times in recent years. Sarfraz had a heated exchange with Taylor as New Zealand, fired up by a hat-trick by returning paceman Trent Boult, won the series opener by 47 runs. Meanwhile, the New Zealand women's team have been crushed by host nation the West Indies in their second warm-up game at the T20 World Cup. Batting first, the White Ferns made 122 for 9 before the Windies reached the victory target with 7 wickets to spare. The White Ferns' first pool game of the World T20 is against India on Saturday morning. That's the news.
A defiant president.
I think you should let me run the country, you run CNN, and if you did it well, your ratings
let me ask, if I may ask one other question.
A call for action.
Put a bit of money into this, because otherwise it's all talk, isn't it?
Challenging the fight.
The sport has become trivialised. I tick the box, I pay the money, I get in the ring, there's my bucket list.
Fighting Fit, morning reports weekdays from 6 with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson.
Then on 9 to noon, hospitals warn new drugs are failing to keep up with antibiotic-resistant superbugs. And after 10, Auckland and Lorraine Thompson on trekking El Camino de Santiago, 800 kilometres from France to Spain. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon, after morning report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Watches and warnings are in place for many parts of the country. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mostly cloudy with a few showers. A period of rain spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls in Taranaki and south of Levin. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine and warm today, cloud increasing tomorrow and rain spreading north. For Nelson and Marlborough, scattered rain becoming widespread tomorrow with some heavy falls, then easing to a few showers later. Buller and Westland, rain with heavy downpours and possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, rain becoming widespread this evening with some heavy falls, snow lowering to about 500 metres tomorrow morning. Rain and snow easing to a few showers later tomorrow. For Fiordland and Southland, remaining rain easing to a few showers this afternoon, and for the Chatham Islands, low cloud, light rain tomorrow morning. It is exactly 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Coming up, the Immigration Minister admits it took him only an hour to decide to let convicted drug smuggler Carol Schrubeck stay in New Zealand. The All Blacks name their starting lineup to face England, and Fonterra bosses apologise to farmers. Wild weather hits the West Coast, but let's begin tonight in Washington, where a day after the Republican defeat in the House in the midterm elections, Donald Trump has been back at some of his favourite pastimes, firing staff and abusing the media. Mr. Trump appeared to be in a sour mood following the Democrats' capture of the House of Representatives last night, though he talked up the Republicans' gain of at least 2 seats in the Senate. He fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions, mocked a number of losing Republican candidates who did not campaign for him, and created an extraordinary stoush with senior White House reporters. In the president's sights was CNN White House correspondent Jim Acosta, who filed this report just before the White House revoked his accreditation.
A news conference that was expected to be a victory lap for President Trump instead descended into chaos. While the president played coy and didn't tip his hand on his decision to fire Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
We're looking at different people for different positions. You know, it's very common after the midterms.
He was sounding off in nearly every other direction. Asked about Democrats riding the midterms into power in the House of Representatives, Mr. Trump bristled at the notion he will be under a slew of investigations, warning he'll retaliate.
They can play that game, but we can play it better, because we have a thing called the United States Senate, and a lot of very questionable things were done between leaks of classified information and many other elements that should not have taken place. And all you're going to do is end up in back and forth.
The president tried to sidestep what could be the biggest worry for the White House, that Democrats will demand to see his tax returns.
I'm on a very continuous audit because there are so many companies, and it is a very big company, far bigger than you would even understand. But it's a great company, but it's big, and it's complex, and it's probably feet high. It's a very complex instrument, and I think that people wouldn't understand it.
Mr. Trump was clearly taking the election returns personally, slapping at House Republicans who decided to steer clear of the president and lost.
Mia Love gave me no love, and she lost. Too bad. Sorry about that, Mia. And Barbara Comstock was another one. I mean, I think she could have won that race, but she didn't want to have any embrace.
Then Mr. Trump started taking swipes at journalists over questions about his false claim during the campaign that a migrant invasion was underway on the border.
They're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings
Let
would
me
be
ask,
much better.
if I may ask one other question. Mr. President, if I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President.
me, that's enough.
Despite the pipe bomb sent to CNN and other Democratic politicians, the president returned to his favorite insults for the media.
Okay, just sit down, please. Well, when you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people.
The president also lashed out at reporters who simply asked why he considers himself a nationalist.
Why do I have among the highest poll numbers with African Americans? I mean, why do I have my highest poll numbers? That's such a racist question. Honestly, I mean, I know you have it written down and you're going to tell me. Let me tell you, it's a racist question.
And whether Mr. Trump is in fact a racist.
And I don't use racist remarks. And you know what? If I did, you would have known about it. I've been hearing there are tapes for years and years. There are tapes. Number one, I never worried about it because I never did. I never used racist remarks. I've never used racist remarks.
And that was CNN's White House correspondent Jim Acosta with that report. Just hours after that press conference, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders tweeted saying that Jim Acosta had been stripped of his press pass. She alleged that he touched a White House intern and went on to say that we will not tolerate the inappropriate behaviour. So what does the video show?
I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN. All right. And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
If I may ask one other question.
The intern moves in at this point to take the mic from Acosta. She reaches for it once, he pulls back. She tries again to take the mic off him. He dodges that attempt as well. The third time, she threads her hand under his arm and reaches for the mic again. Their arms brush together, and that is as Acosta pulls his left hand back to take a hold of the mic, so he's holding it with both hands. Their arms touch for a nanosecond. CNN has put this response on its Twitter account, basically saying that Sarah Sanders has lied, they say. She provided fraudulent accusations and cited an incident that never happened, CNN says. They say it's an unprecedented decision and is a threat to the democracy of our country, and our country deserves better, they say. Jim Acosta has CNN's full support, they say, in that tweet that went out shortly afterwards. Let's go now to our correspondent Harry Horton in Washington. Harry, it is all happening over there. After this stoush at the press conference, what has been the reaction to Jim Acosta losing his accreditation and the accusations made by the White House against him?
Well, most of the reaction I've seen so far, certainly from journalists, has been of shock. I think this is viewed as a complete overreaction from the White House. If you look at that video, if you look at what happened in the White House today, and of course there were cameras everywhere, so there's no shortage of footage of this incident. The way in which it's been characterised by the White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders is completely inaccurate. You know, this language of Jim Acosta assaulting a female intern at the White House, I mean, that just is not what happened. As you say, their arms brushed together for a nanosecond. So This is being viewed as an attempt by this administration to restrict access to the president by a news organisation and by a reporter that they don't like. That is something that we haven't seen before in Washington for previous administrations. Of course, this is a country that prides itself on freedom of the press, on having access to the president, on being able to ask him all sorts of questions. So, there will be a strong reaction from this. I think the question will be, in the days and weeks ahead, how does the rest of the press corps here in Washington react? Do other news organisations perhaps choose to boycott these press conferences until all of the major news networks are allowed to attend them and ask whatever questions they want?
Harry, how would you describe the tone of that press conference? Because it wasn't just Jim Acosta that he had a go at. He accused another reporter of being racist, and he was demanding that a number of the reporters sit down and basically, zip it, be quiet. How would you describe the tone there and the fact that he kind of went on the defensive from the get-go, it seems?
Yeah, it was a pretty tense press conference. I mean, look, it all started with President Trump coming out and boasting about what he said was tremendous success in these midterm elections for the Republican Party. He wanted to put a positive spin on the results, but I think it's clear from his tone and the way in which he got on the back foot and went into attack mode against the reporters in the room, it's clear that he does feel threatened by this new Democratic majority here in Washington. This will be a very different situation for him over the next 2 years. The Democrats do have the power now, if they want to launch all sorts of investigations into the White House. Life will not be as easy for President Trump as it has been in the past. He likes to pick fights with his opponents, be that the Democrats, or in some instances he chooses to pick fights with the news media. So, look, it sets the tone for the next 2 years for a pretty combative Washington, but that's nothing we're not used to here in Washington. But perhaps, any hope of bipartisanship, of a new kind of civil tone after an incredibly divisive election, I think we can put that to one side now and take a look at what looks like it's going to be a pretty dire and pretty messy couple of years as we head towards the 2020 presidential election.
President Trump did sound a very strong warning to the Democrats if they were to come after him and to take a closer look at his taxes, for example. Do you think that the Democrats will ignore that and put Donald Trump on the top of their to-do list in terms of investigating his personal affairs?
Yeah, I think that will be pretty high up the Democrats' to-do list. Look, I mean, there's a challenge for the Democrats because a lot of their more progressive activist base, they will be demanding that the Democrats launch all sorts of investigations into Donald Trump from day one, as soon as they get back into power in Congress come January. So that's the pressure that the leadership and the Democrats are facing. Now, if they do launch all those investigations and if they block absolutely every single piece of legislation that Donald Trump tries to push through Congress, that might alienate some more moderate voters who might be sick and tired of this partisan atmosphere that we have in Washington. So it's quite a difficult needle for the Democrats to thread there. But look, I think no doubt about it, Donald Trump's tax returns are pretty high on the agenda for the Democrats, and I don't think it will be too soon into 2019 when we start to see the Democrats trying to get their hands onto those tax returns and try and make them public in an attempt, they hope, to embarrass President Donald Trump.
The thing is, while all of this was unfolding, Jeff Sessions almost became a footnote, didn't he? But the Attorney General has resigned. Well, effectively, he was booted, wasn't he, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the letter of his resignation, the opening line says that he was asked to resign by President Trump. Now, look, we can speculate why this has happened. It was no surprise. The two men have had a pretty bad relationship for a number of months now, and Donald Trump has ridiculed Jeff Sessions on an almost weekly basis. What does this mean for the Russia investigation? That's the big question on everyone's lips. We don't quite know, but there are certainly more question marks over Robert Mueller's Russia inquiry than there were 24 hours ago. The man who previously was overseeing the Russia investigation was the Deputy Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He had issued support for the Russia investigation and its independence. The new man overseeing it is the Acting Attorney General. His name is Matthew Whitaker. His previous public comments, he's written an article for a news website where he has criticised the Robert Mueller investigation for going after Donald Trump's finances. He's also speculated in other news appearances that you could shut down the Russia inquiry by cutting off funding for it and allowing it to grind to a halt. He's in charge of that investigation now. He has power to dictate its scope, to dictate its funding, to dictate what sort of information is released to Congress. So there are big question marks over where that Russia investigation goes from here. Indeed, how long it can continue under someone who has questioned its very existence.
Thank you, Harry. That is Harry Horton reporting there from Washington. And to politics back home now, the Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, has admitted it took him about an hour to decide to let Carol Schrubeck stay in New Zealand and that he didn't read the entire file. National says it is now overwhelmingly obvious that Mr Lees-Galloway didn't do his job and made a decision to make New Zealanders less safe in less time than it takes to play a game of rugby. Mr Lees-Galloway refused to be interviewed on Checkpoint tonight, but here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Immigration officials are now investigating what was in the file they provided to Mr Lees-Galloway after new information came to light that he said he didn't have when he made the decision. Under questioning by National's Michael Woodhouse in Parliament, Ian Lees-Galloway revealed that he received the file on Carol Schrubeck at 4:30 p.m. on the day that he made the decision.
Can he therefore confirm it took him less than an hour to make his decision to grant residency?
I made the decision on that day using the information that I had available to me.
Michael Woodhouse pushed on.
Is it common practice for him to consider cases to, in his words, quote, weigh matters of public safety and the criminal behaviour of the individual involved, end quote, just minutes or hours after being presented to him?
Well, Mr Speaker, I used the same process that the member used when he was Minister.
Outside the House, Ian Lees-Galloway confirmed Mr Woodhouse's claim that he did in fact only spend about an hour with the file.
I gave it the due consideration. I asked a lot of questions during that meeting and I gave it the due consideration that I was able to with the information that I had available to me at the time.
Michael Woodhouse says that's an extraordinary development.
Well, I've been there, I know what is involved, and certainly a decision to overturn a deportation like this should have been much more carefully considered. I certainly suspected for some time that that wasn't the case, and the answers to questions today demonstrated that.
Mr Lees-Galloway then revealed he did not read the full file.
I was presented a summary of the file. We went through that. I looked at different aspects of the file. I asked questions about the file, so I can't break that down into different.
You read the summary though. You didn't read the full file.
I read various aspects of the full file.
Meanwhile, earlier today, Carol Schrubeck released a statement from prison hitting back at National's Deputy Leader Paula Bennett, saying he's not responsible for the burglary of a home that he's claimed a financial interest in. Yesterday in Parliament, Paula Bennett asked whether new information that officials were looking at in the Schrubeck case included the burglary of his estranged wife's house just days after he'd learned it had gone on the market. Carol Schrubeck clearly got wind of the questions and sent his own response via his lawyer from his prison cell. He said her questions in Parliament implied that he may have had something to do with an alleged burglary of a property he had an interest in. He went on to say that allegation was completely without foundation. Outside the debating chamber and also outside the protection of parliamentary privilege, Mrs Bennett was careful with her words.
Oh, just simply asking questions in the House like we're meant to do and seeking answers from the Minister, which we haven't been able to get.
Mrs Bennett says now that Schrubeck is writing statements, there are more questions he could answer.
Like, did he travel back to the Czech? Was he worried and concerned about his life? Who made representations on his behalf to the Minister? Why would the parole board actually say that he is untruthful and that they didn't believe him and then he expects us to?
The deadline for officials to report back to the Immigration Minister is still 2 weeks away, but the Prime Minister has made it clear she wants the matter sorted much sooner than that. Atu I te whare pāri mata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
Schools and roads were closed on the west coast today as the area was drenched by heavy rainfall, making it a miserable day for locals and tourists alike. Flooding and slips shut a large section of State Highway 6 from Fox Glacier to Hokitika, along with part of State Highway 73 at Arthur's Pass. But as Jonathan Mitchell reports, it's been a day of extremes across the country. While the west coast experienced heavy rainfall and flooding, locals in Hawke's Bay were basking in the sun.
Dirty brown water washed over the highway today, causing slips and preventing traffic from getting through. But South Westland area school students were able to reach their homes beyond the road closure, courtesy of a police escort. Westland Mayor Bruce Smith spotted trees and even a camper van in the river.
We've had a camper van parked in the middle of the river. It's not parked there now. It might be heading to Aussie, down across the Tasman. My instinct is that the weather event has passed over the top of us, and I think the worst is over. That's my feeling, having seen many of these things.
He says gumboots were at the ready in Hokitika in case the river burst its banks, and a welfare centre was opened in Harihari, but was closed later in the day as the weather calmed.
I've been down and to the old people's home, the Ellen Bryant Hotel, had to talk to the oldies and told them that while they've got their gumboots there, they won't need them. And the tourists were just saying, look, head for the pub, go and have a meal, have a beer, sit by the fire and sit it out, because that's the most practical thing to do.
While it was beers and a warm meal in Hokitika, motorists were warned of strong winds on Arthur's Pass, especially for motorbikes and camper vans. Students from Otago Boys High School on camp were caught out by the weather at Mount Aspiring National Park. Deputy Rector Mark Hooper says the boys are stuck there until tomorrow at least, because a creek is impassable.
But with the weather slamming into the west coast there, it sort of overspills to the Matukituki Valley, and there's a creek which runs by the side of the lodge which they have to cross over to get back to the road, and it can rise very rapidly and also go down just as quickly, and it's just too high apparently to cross safely today.
Mr Hooper says the boys are safe, dry and in high spirits, with plenty of supplies. In the North Island, the Rimutaka Hill Road is shut. A severe wind warning is in place for Wellington and southern Wairarapa, with wind gusts expected to reach 130 kilometres per hour until 11 o'clock tonight. But not all places have been miserable. Hawke's Bay has been baking in hot temperatures, and these locals were trying to keep cool.
We got a school, so air-conditioned classrooms. One way to do it, stay in the shade, wear a hat, all that stuff, yeah.
It's beautiful. I'm sitting in the shade watching my grandson get rid of all his energy. We're going to Strawberry Patch to have ice creams.
How are you feeling?
Oh, good. We're just looking around all the houses for Holly Trail. But yes, it is getting a bit warm now.
But don't put away those winter clothes just yet. Met Service forecaster Jerry Kaiser says the rain will head to the North Island tomorrow.
There won't be a dry spot, so everybody is getting some of the rain. So the whole of North Island getting some of the rain at some time. Mostly then, as I say, from Friday afternoon into overnight period to Saturday morning. But from there on, it starts clearing up again.
State Highway 6 on the west coast is expected to remain shut tonight and will be reviewed tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, authorities are warning of heavy rain in Canterbury overnight, but no significant flooding is expected. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, 10
In the past half hour, the All Blacks have not long ago named their team to take on England in this weekend's highly anticipated test at Twickenham. A couple of young stars have been given the nod to play in the biggest test of their burgeoning careers, with the match expected to rival the pressure cooker atmosphere of a World Cup final. Rugby reporter Joe Porter joins us live now from our Wellington studio. Hi Joe, Jack Goodhue starts at centre alongside Sonny Bill Williams. Is he now the All Blacks' first choice centre?
Well, it would appear that way. It looks like he's usurped Ryan Crotty as the All Blacks' first choice centre alongside Sonny Bill Williams, their first choice second five. So what we're looking at this weekend could well be the starting centre pairing for next year's World Cup. Jack Goodhue has recovered from glandular fever to take his spot and push Ryan Crotty to the bench. So a big mark of respect for the young man, and he faces his biggest challenge this weekend in what will be a real pressure cooker atmosphere, like you said, at Twickenham.
And Damien McKenzie at fullback. What's Steve Hanson's reasoning there, do you think?
Yeah, well, they like to have two playmakers on the field at any one time to give the likes of Beauden Barrett at first five, I guess, a bit of a breather, a chance to recover and take some weight off his shoulders when things get a little bit tough. The English forwards are likely to slow down the ball at the breakdown and really put some pressure on the All Blacks on defence. So it gives a guy like Beauden Barrett, when the All Blacks forward pack aren't going forward, an option in Damien McKenzie to help, I guess, spread the load and break some of the game-breaking potential and be a playmaker and direct the team around the field. So it helps ease some of that load, and also he's spectacular under the high ball, and the All Blacks can expect plenty of high kicks from the English this weekend, that's for sure.
So 80,000 fans expected at Twickenham. That is massive. Why is this game so big?
Well, 2017, the English team had won 18 matches in a row to match the All Blacks' unbeaten run set in previous years, and of course the All Blacks were unbeaten that year too, so everyone was desperate to see the top two teams in the world clash. A year later, the English aren't quite as strong as they were, but it's still a match that's been highly anticipated for a long time. It's been 4 years since these two teams have met. At Twickenham was the last time, another very close game. It just really brings about a lot in the New Zealand fans. There's a nervousness about this match at Twickenham. It is a huge game, and it will replicate what will likely be a World Cup playoff next year. So a lot on the line for an All Blacks team that's looked good this year but not perfect, and in a pressure cooker situation like this, it will replicate the World Cup next year. So it'll be great to see how this All Blacks team responds to that kind of environment.
We're almost out of time, Joe, but Joe Moody's eye injury looks spectacular in the pictures. Is it as bad as it looks?
Yeah, he's had 3 layers of stitches. He's had a big scratch on his eyelid, and of course he's lost half of it essentially, so he needs to take 6 weeks out now and have some surgery to fix that eyelid and make sure it comes back to full shape, because it is essentially, like Steve Hansen said, the window washer for the eye, and if there's some permanent damage there, it could really affect his long-term vision. So poor old Joe Moody's had a rough year with injury, and he misses this test as well. Poor bugger can't catch a break.
Oh no, that sounds gruesome. Thanks very much. That's Joe Porter there. And coming up, Fonterra bosses apologise to farmers, professional boxing groups distance themselves from corporate and charity boxing events. We're at Ratana, and Boeing issues a global warning to airlines about potential problems with the 737 MAX aircraft. That's after the fatal crash in Indonesia. Don't forget to send us some of your feedback. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, or email us at checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But here is Katrina with the headlines.
The Immigration Minister has admitted not reading the whole file when deciding to let drug smuggler Karel Srubeck stay in New Zealand. Immigration officials are investigating what was in the file they gave Mr Lees Galloway after new information emerged which said he did not have earlier. Mr Lees Galloway says it took him about an hour to make his initial decision, but having since read the entire file, he stands by his decision. The father of an Auckland woman stabbed to death last year has told the jury he found his daughter in a pool of blood. Arishma Chand was stabbed to death last November, and Rohit Deepak Singh was charged with her murder 3 days later. He pleaded not guilty and is now on trial at the High Court in Auckland. An independent investigation has failed to find out who leaked a report into alleged bullying by the former government minister Meka Whaitiri. The Prime Minister asked for an inquiry into Internal Affairs' leak of the edited report, which found it probable that Ms Whaitiri grabbed her press secretary's arm. Jacinda Ardern stripped Ms Whaitiri of her ministerial responsibilities following the altercation in Gisborne in August. Deloitte's inquiry has found no evidence that Internal Affairs staff leaked the report, but it did highlight poor control of security and access. Professional boxing groups are distancing themselves from corporate and charity boxing events amid fears they're harming the sport. Boxing New Zealand is stopping its involvement to protect its reputation, and the Professional Boxing Commission is also looking at whether to continue with charity matches. It follows the death of Christchurch man Kane Parsons, who was injured during a charity event at the weekend. A group of Year 9 and 10 Otago Boys High School students is stranded in Mount Aspiring National Park after heavy rain made a creek impassable. They'll come out of the Matukituki Valley tomorrow if the weather permits. And a Qantas flight from Sydney has had to be diverted from Wellington to Christchurch due to fierce winds battering the capital. The flight attempted to land at about 4 o'clock but aborted and flew to Christchurch, where it will refuel before returning to Wellington. Several other flights into Wellington have been delayed. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Katrina. Managers at New Zealand's largest company turned up at a South Waikato dairy plant today to apologise for making a 9-figure loss. Fonterra bosses also gave their farmer shareholders a glimpse of what they are doing to turn the company around, though they held back many details because of commercial sensitivity. Some of the 400 or so farmers who turned up for the meeting at Putararu accepted their managers' comments, but others did not. Eric Frickberg was at the gathering.
In the year to July, Fonterra made a $196 million loss, compared with a profit a year earlier of $734 million. Much of the blame stemmed from a $230 million payout after a false botulism scare and a $439 million write-down in its investment in the Chinese company Boeing. Speaking to farmer shareholders today, the company's chairman, John Monaghan, simply said sorry.
Put simply, we didn't deliver right across the business. We didn't meet the commitments we made to our farmers and unit holders. We need to do better in the future. Let me be very clear. Your board and management are well aware of the impact past performance has had on the value of our investment.
Mr Monaghan then went on to tell his audience what he planned to do about it. Cut debt levels by $800 million, prepared to divest assets and hire Goldman Sachs to investigate the role in Boeing.
At this stage, nothing is off the table. And if we choose to divest our ownership of an asset, it could be in full or in part. It is not a fire sale, there are no sacred cows, and there's no room for being sentimental.
Mr Monaghan said 3 areas of the company had been singled out for attention, but he wouldn't name them apart from Boeing. Managers wouldn't comment on a suggestion that the loss-making China Farms company might be one. Many people at the gathering reluctantly went along with the management's plans, but a Taranaki dairy farmer, Barry Goebel, wasn't one of them.
Your China Farms, are you ever going to make a profit there? Are you going to keep spending money there? I believe that you've got 50,000 cows and 50,000 dry stock. From the way I can see it, you're feeding something that you're never going to get properly paid for.
Another farmer, Julie Bryan of Cambridge, was unhappy with how much money she has to pay to keep her local council happy.
We're at the butt end of costs being passed on all the time, compliance and everything like that. Now, we might get $6 something, but look where it's all going. It's going in a compliance, a lot of it, and, you know, we're still getting very little.
Another farmer, Lloyd Downing of Morrinsville, said he got fed up with constant complaints about Fonterra in China when the company was actually doing well. But Fonterra's board of directors still needed to lift their game.
You've got to make sure that your board is disciplined. If anybody doesn't get their own way, they cannot get out into the press or threaten to get out in the press and destroy the culture of our board.
Today's meeting was without real fireworks, with most members keen on seeing just what their managers would do, but that acceptance mightn't last if the company reforms don't work. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
And joining me now for more business news is Nona Peltier. What else do we know about the Fonterra Shareholders Council? What do they think of all of this?
Well, they released a report last night, just by not a coincidence. And in that report, it's a very detailed report. It's an independent assessment of the performance of Fonterra over its life, you know, the 17 years going back. And it was prepared by Northington Partners. It's an independent report, and it's scathing of Fonterra. And this was not presented to Fonterra at the annual meeting, mostly because many of the members had not seen this report. Fonterra wasn't really familiar with it, but don't worry, they will soon become so. There's no doubt about that. And this report shows that they have underperformed materially. So in other words, their benchmarks over the past 17 years have missed the mark, and also have deteriorated over the past 5 years. And we're talking about a return on capital of 6% versus a benchmark of 6.9. 7.7 is where the range should have been, and the NZX Top 50 Index outperformed Fonterra. So these are not good statistics. This is independent information, and the Shareholders Council are going to take them to task for sure. And this report has got more of a life in it yet, believe it.
Does it identify its interests in China as part of the problem?
It does. It goes through all sorts of issues. They say that not only has it underperformed, that they have failed to generate sufficient funds on the value-added businesses, including, of course, Boeing.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to Sky City. It has sold its casino, Darwin Casino.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, they've been wanting to sell it for a while. It's an underperformer. And the company has other fish to fry, basically, and a new chief executive. So Darwin is from the old era, and the new era is Graham Stevens. He's a new chief executive, been in the job for about 18 months, reviewed the operations of Sky City, and said one of the things that they really definitely wanted to do was get rid of the Darwin Casino. It's been underperforming for a lot of reasons. One, it's not really on the international travel map, so it's hard to get the high rollers there, and so they don't get the same, there's
it's
a lot
not
of
a glamour
reasons.
location for overseas visitors.
No, it isn't
gamblers.
really, but I mean, I have not been there. I hear it's quite nice. Anyway, somebody was willing to pay 188 million Australian dollars for it, so it can't be a shabby place, right? And not only that, Sky City made a good deal because they want to continue to send their high rollers there, so they got a deal with their new, partner. I guess it's kind of a partner. So the company they've sold it to is called Delaware North, and they're an hospitality business, quite well, heeled, I think. Obviously, they had $188 million. So Sky will still be able to send their high rollers there for a couple of years after the deal's done, and they have an option to do a joint venture with the same company to set up an online gaming business when Australia puts in regulations, and then that would require them to have a base there in the Northern Territory. So that deal's going to be for 10 years. Good deal, I think, from Sky City. Certainly the market liked it. Their share price rose 3.5% today by 13 cents to $3.83, which is different from Fonterra's, which was just steady as she goes.
Any other highlights on the market, and what about our dollar?
Well, our top 50 index ended up nearly 0.5%, and certainly the mood was much more positive in Asia today. Some certainty there with where Donald Trump is going to go or not go, so to speak. 41 points to 8,896. And our currency also had some overnight gains. 67.9 managed to hang on to those today, despite the Reserve Bank holding firm on the official cash rate. 93.2 Australian, also not a bad level there. 51.7 pence. There you go. 4-month high, by the way.
4-month high. Thanks, Nona. Appreciate that. Professional boxing groups are distancing themselves from corporate and charity boxing events amid fears they are harming the sport. Boxing New Zealand has announced it's stopping its involvement to protect its reputation, and the Professional Boxing Commission is also looking at whether to continue with charity matches. The move comes after the death of Christchurch man Kane Parsons, who was injured during a charity event at the weekend. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
Boxing New Zealand would prefer to be in control of the sport it governs. Its chair, Keith Walker, says that's why it's stepping back from corporate charity events.
We have something like 1,000 people registered under us and hundreds of people right throughout New Zealand that don't do competitive boxing but are in boxing gyms. And we provide this to very many communities throughout New Zealand, and we do not want this to damage our image at all.
Boxing New Zealand is the governing body for amateur and Olympic-style boxing. It's just one of several authorities that control boxing events in this country, including corporate events. The Professional Boxing Commission, which sanctions and officiates professional boxing matches within New Zealand, is another. Commissioner Fayez Khan says it's to hold a meeting soon to talk about its future with corporate boxing. He says they're worried about the harm it's doing to the sport.
Of course we are. And anything happens to a fighter in the ring, it's a big concern to the organisation and to the event organisers. And definitely we're going to have a meeting about this, and we're going to thresh it out to see what the best solution is.
Mr. Khan says it's become too much of a free-for-all.
Anybody can do a charity event these days. They turn up, 10 people turn up, and there's a 5-bout boxing event. And that is one area we're definitely going to look into so that this sort of thing does not happen again.
There are 52 associations sanctioned by the Department of Internal Affairs to promote or approve boxing contests. The department administers the Boxing and Wrestling Act, under which contests are approved. Keith Walker says Kane Parsons' death, the second in 2 years involving a boxer at a corporate event, is a wake-up call for all. But change rests with those issuing licences to run events which are based on a combat sport.
All of those tournaments that run under our jurisdiction, they have to apply to us for a permit. We issue a permit that they then have to take to the police, and the police approve it or not approve it.
The Minister of Internal Affairs, Tracy Martin, says she's asked officials for advice on whether the regulations can be changed. She says parts of the law date back to 1908, but any change isn't likely to happen quickly.
Well, legislation takes a long time, and that's why I've asked the officials to come back to me with regard to how quickly can we change regulation, which is faster to change. We need to obviously talk to those that are in the boxing fraternity. We need to sit down and have a conversation in the round and say, how can we make this better?
Mrs Martin says it might be time to also include martial arts and other combat sports under the Act. Boxing New Zealand's Keith Walker says if he could wave a magic wand, he'd make sure corporate events were run under one set of rules.
I would make sure that nationwide, every organisation has to have a set of guidelines and regulations around corporate events, the same rulings and the same governance.
Mrs Martin says it's possible they might look to rugby as an example of how regulation has changed for the safety of players. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
The father of an Auckland woman killed in their family home last year has told a jury about finding his daughter in a pool of blood. Arishma Chand was found stabbed to death in her Manurewa home on the 12th of November last year. Rohit Deepak Singh is on trial in the High Court at Auckland after pleading not guilty to murdering the 24-year-old mother. Our court reporter Annika Smith has been following the case, now in its second week, and filed this report.
The day Miss Chand was killed started out like any normal Saturday for Rakeshwar Singh. He told the jury the family had breakfast together before going to a dealership to find Miss Chand a new car. Later on, the family went their separate ways, Miss Chand to get her hair done for a night out and her parents to a friend's house in Mangere. Her father said he was still in Mangere when he got a call around 10 to 1 in the morning from his daughter, who was afraid after hearing a noise on the deck outside.
Arishma called me that she's already at home and she got a stone on the deck. I told Arishma not to get worried. I've already come out from here. I'll be at home within 15 minutes.
It was the last time Mr. Singh ever spoke to his daughter. He went on to tell the jury what happened when he and his wife arrived home.
After I parked the car, both of us came out, and I went to close the gate. My wife took the groceries and she started walking on the deck and calling, Arishma, we are here, just open the door. Then as soon as she reached the door, she held the handle and the door was open.
Mr. Singh said his wife called out that she couldn't hear their daughter's voice.
I ran towards the door. I ran to the house and to Arishma's room, and I saw Arishma lying on the floor with a pool of blood.
Tears rolled down his cheeks as he told Crown Prosecutor Jelena Jelavic what happened next.
I just called her and I shook her hand.
Were you on your own in the room, or what was your wife doing?
She was standing behind me and she started crying.
Did your wife go to Arishma?
Yeah. Then I started calling the police and I told my wife not to touch Arishma.
Arishma met the accused through her father, who had worked with him for more than 10 years in a furniture shop in Fiji. Mr. Singh told the jury they had been good friends and he thought of him as a brother. But that changed when it was revealed he intended to marry his daughter.
I said no means no, because Rohit was just like 43 years old and I respect Rohit like as my younger brother. I always treat him like that, and no way I can't get married, both of you.
The Crown's case is that Rohit Singh was an obsessed ex-boyfriend who stalked Miss Chand in the months leading up to her death. The pair had been in a sexual relationship in 2016, during which Miss Chand fell pregnant, but she got an abortion and broke up with him. Last week the jury heard he was heartbroken and tried to get back with Miss Chand, messaging her almost daily, leaving flowers at her home and even getting a tattooed picture of her on his chest. The trial before Justice Powell is set down for 4 weeks. Atu iti ko te mātua, ko Annika Smith aho.
Followers of the Ratana faith are remembering their founder as a prophet, a healer and a Māori miracle man. Ratana Pā near Whanganui is a hive of activity today as thousands celebrate 100 years of Ratana faith. A plaque was unveiled today at the house where their prophet, Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana, had a vision on this day in 1918. Camera operator Rebecca Parsons-King was there with our Māori news correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin.
A milestone achieved, a plaque revealed. The brass band played and crowds gathered at the old cream and green wooden house where T.W. Ratana was when the Holy Spirit came to him. A hugely special moment for church spokesperson Mitariri Nui.
Well, for us it's a time for celebration, acknowledgement of that day in 1918 when the Holy Spirit descended from the throne of Ihua and walked amongst the people. I mean, whoever talks like that anymore? Yeah, no, it's just an incredible story. So we are a product of that visitation, and we are the ones who carry it into the future. 100 years is not a great deal of time.
A few thousand people from all over the country and abroad have been pouring into the Pā to mark the anniversary. It's been a big catch-up for many. Ratana follower Boston Peke hopes it will strengthen their relationships.
Well, hopefully sort of unite us Māori people, come together as a collective so we can, you know, help each other out and, you know, whānau whānui, come together as a collective and with health and all that sort of stuff too as well, you know. Yeah, heal our people.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern gave the church 4 gifts, including $1.9 million for housing, a copy of the Treaty of Waitangi, 8 harakeke bushes, as well as something very personal.
It's a copy of the Bible that I was gifted by my mother. To acknowledge that shared value contained within it, that is always being upheld and taught by the Ratana movement, but which I hope I will continue to uphold on behalf of this government.
Over the past 100 years, the Ratana faith has remained a religious stronghold for Māori. The 2013 census shows more than 40,000 Ratana followers, and today more than 60 people were baptised in the Temepara tapu. So who was Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana? Well, 85-year-old Pikingaonga Maunga McFadden was born here and says she remembers him.
He was a very humble person, and briefly saw him when he's on the marae tide. We lived here, and in those days everything was beautiful, and my given name was Pikingaonga Maunga, and I asked what the name is all about. He said it was named after the travelling of the Māngai Tahu Pōtiki when he went to travel the different iwi areas.
The stories of T.W. Ratana have also been passed down to the next generation, such as youth MP for Te Taihoauru, Taylor Nikara.
Oh, he was a māngai, he was a healer, he brought everyone together, and he's the reason that everybody is here today and for this huinga.
The local Ratana school, which has about 30 students, put on a play today about children's perspectives of Ratana. Charlene Pōtaka met her partner at Ratana 20 years ago and says it's all about the next generation.
I mean, I had to get my family out of bed this morning and said, let's go, just let's pack the car and let's go. I told them that it's the place of home. It is the place of home.
There has been a huge focus on young people at the event with a rangatahi tent and music concerts. Even the Prime Minister made the time for Ratana rangatahi, as the church hopes they will carry the faith for another 100 years. In Ratana, mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi pōnei, ko Lee Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
Opponents of a massive housing development set to be built alongside historically significant land in Auckland say they will do whatever it takes to stop it going ahead. The Environment Court yesterday released its decision, which declined to overturn the permission granted to Fletcher Building to put up 480 homes next to the Ihumatoa and Otua Tā'awa Stonefields Historic Reserve in Mangere. Matthew Tunison went to the site this afternoon.
Pania Newton sings a song of protest from the idyllic Kaitiaki village in rural Mangere. She's not deterred by the Environment Court's decision, giving the green light for the housing development to be built, and says she'll go to any lengths to stop it.
We've always maintained that we are peaceful, passive and respectful, but if it comes to it, we are prepared to stand in front of the bulldozers to prevent them from coming onto this land. I'll put my life on the line for this kaupapa because it's so important.
She and about 15 others from the group Save Our Unique Landscape, or SOUL, have been living at the site for the past 2 years, sleeping in caravans, sheds, tents, and even an empty boat. They say the development would destroy the land, which is home to New Zealand's earliest gardens, and considered waihi tapu by local hapu and iwi. The group's Facebook page has over 5,000 members, and Ms Newton sees parallels between what's happening at Ihumātao and the occupation of Bastion Point in the 1970s.
You know, we're talking about a 100,000-year project of human migration, and it was here in Aotearoa that project came to an end, and it was here at Ihumātao the history of Māori really became.
However, Fletchers says the Environment Court's decision reaffirms that it is entirely justified in going ahead with the project. A spokesperson, Steve Evans, points out that the Environment Court found the company actually provides a higher level of protection than is required. He calls yesterday's decision the last legal hurdle and hopes construction will begin next year.
It was clearly a positive step forward in terms of recognising the good consultative work that we'd been doing on the project.
Mr Evans says Fletchers have now been through the Waitangi Tribunal, the Māori Land Court and now the Environment Court, as well as the normal consenting process.
The attempts by some of our opponents to stop the process have not been successful, and we look forward to delivering the homes that Aucklanders need.
Former Historic Places Trust archaeologist Dave Vert says we've only scratched the surface of the information the land can reveal, and if the development goes ahead, it'll be lost forever.
It's like money in the bank having untouched archaeological sites. You know, you don't actually have to do anything with them. You know, you can just sit and wait until the technology gets to the point where, you know, who knows what information can be extracted.
The Ihumātao Peninsula is also associated with arrival myths about the first Māori living in Aotearoa.
Parts to the landscape are identified with the arrival of the Tainui Waka, in fact identified with the arrival of the ancestor Hape who beat it there by riding a stingray. Always go for the powerboat. That sort of idea, that memory that this is a place where we started, seems to me to be a really good reason that archaeologically we should think, right, let's go and have a look a bit more carefully at this spot.
The proposed development will not be on the Otuatoa stonefields themselves, but on adjoining vacant land. However, opponents say this land is also of great significance, and any development will be highly detrimental to the stonefields. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Matthew Tunis and tēnei.
The Police Commissioner Mike Bush has been grilled by MPs in a parliamentary committee this morning for not answering a barrage of questions about Wally Homaha. The report into Mr Homaha's appointment to the job of Deputy Police Commissioner has come back from Mary Sholton's QC, who the government tasked with running the 6-week inquiry, but it hasn't been made public, so Mr Bush refused to answer questions until he's seen it. Here's political reporter Gia Garrick.
The Police Commissioner's refusal to answer questions sparked a fiery exchange at the Justice Committee led by National MPs Chris Bishop and Nick Smith. Mike Bush was defended by the Labour MP Duncan Webb, who sits on the committee across from the pair.
Am I to take it that the Police Commissioner is refusing to answer a very direct, simple question, did you know?
He's answered that question.
Well, no, he hasn't. He's refused to answer it.
He's answered your question,
no,
which is to say that until the report is released, he will not, quite rightly, in my view, will not answer questions on the subject matter in the report.
Mr Bishop says it's clear the government is purposefully gagging Mr Bush. He says they've had the report since Friday, but have refused to release it.
The government knows or knew that we had the Commissioner up for a 90-minute Select Committee hearing this morning. They knew that, and they've cynically delayed the release of the report until after the committee's finished its hearing this morning and going into a 2-week recess when Parliament doesn't sit. It's a disgrace.
But the Police Minister Stuart Nash says that's nonsense.
Oh no, we're going through a process. It wasn't held back for any reason. No one was being disingenuous in this. There's a process we have to go through around natural justice, and my understanding is those who have been affected in the report, they have to have the ability to have a look at that and determine if things get redacted or not.
Following the Select Committee, the Police Commissioner Mike Bush confirmed he'd been interviewed once during Ms Shulton's inquiry and been contacted once more for a clarification. He then shared with reporters why he chose not to speak on the matter at today's committee.
I just want to be careful about what I say until the report's released. I'm very conscious of the rules surrounding government inquiries, and I certainly don't want to be in breach of those.
Mr Bush also confirmed he has complete confidence in Mr Homaha. He said Mr Homaha has been continuing his work as Deputy Commissioner from home while the inquiry's been underway.
The work continues. He has a very good group working with him, and they are very focused on continuing that good work. Do I have trust and confidence? Yes, I do.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it will be a few days yet until the report is released. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway has admitted he took only an hour to decide to let the convicted drug smuggler Karel Schrubeck stay in New Zealand and did not read the entire case file. Officials are investigating what was in the file they provided to Mr Lees-Galloway after new information came to light he said he didn't have when he made the decision. Here's our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell.
Ian Lees-Galloway says he took less than an hour to make up his mind, saying that was much longer than he'd taken on other cases. He says he went through the summary with his officials, admitting he did not read the file in its entirety before making a decision. National's Michael Woodhouse says it's now clear it was a terrible decision made by an arrogant minister who didn't look at his papers properly. He says a decision to overturn a deportation like this should have been much more carefully considered. Atu i te whare pārimata, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
Bad weather has closed roads, caused flooding and slips and disrupted flights in some parts of the country. In Mount Aspiring National Park, 26 students and 3 staff from Otago Boys High School have been stranded in a hut by rising river levels. Elizabeth Brown reports.
Heavy rain is still hitting the west coast and Mount Cook areas where extreme rainfall has already been recorded. State Highway 6 between Fox Glacier and Hokitika is closed due to flooding, as is State Highway 73 at Arthur's Pass. Local school children in Harihari had to be taken home by the police due to slips and flooding. Further north, high winds closed the Remataka Hill Road, but it has now reopened. Some flights into Wellington have been delayed and one flight from Sydney had to be diverted to Christchurch as gale force winds batter the capital. But while much of the South Island was getting a drenching, Cheviot in North Canterbury recorded a maximum temperature of 31.2 degrees, the warmest temperature in the country since March the 5th. Ko Elizabeth Brown, aho.
National's Chris Bishop is accusing the government of gagging the police commissioner, who refused to answer questions on the Wally Homaha inquiry today. Police Commissioner Mike Bush appeared before a parliamentary committee for the annual review of the New Zealand Police and immediately faced questions from National on the matter. The report into the appointment of Mr Homaha to Deputy Commissioner of Police is finished and with the government, but hasn't been released publicly. Mr Bush said he hasn't seen it, so wouldn't answer questions on it. Police Minister Stuart Nash says the report will be released once all the legalities have been ticked off, and then Mr Bush can be asked back.
It wasn't held back for any reason. No one was being disingenuous in this. There's a process we have to go through around natural justice, and my understanding is those who have been affected in the report, they have to have the ability to have a look at that and determine if things get redacted or not.
Stuart Nash. CNN's White House correspondent Jim Acosta, who was described by President Trump as a rude, terrible person at a press conference, has had his press pass to the White House withdrawn. The president's spokeswoman, Sarah Sanders, says Mr Acosta had placed his hands on a young woman trying to do her job as a White House intern. Television footage showed the intern attempting to grab the microphone from Mr Acosta. CNN says the press secretary has made a fraudulent accusation. On Twitter, Mr Acosta posted a recording of the moment he was stopped from entering the White House grounds.
Why do you mind? I mean,
I was just told to do it.
Okay, well, I have every right to record this. This is Jim Acosta. I am in front of the White House. Secret Service officer is asking for my hard pass. Obviously, no hard feelings to the officer, but I am now giving my hard pass. to the Secret Service.
CNN's Jim Acosta. Professional boxing groups in New Zealand are distancing themselves from corporate and charity boxing events amid fears they're harming the sport. Boxing New Zealand has announced it's stopping its involvement to protect its reputation, and the Professional Boxing Commission is also looking at whether to continue with charity matches. The move comes after the death of Christchurch man Kane Parsons, who suffered a brain injury during a charity match at the weekend. Boxing New Zealand Chair Keith Walker told Checkpoint that it wants to disassociate itself from charity boxing events.
It just means that we want to make it quite clear that we have a different set of rulings and a different set of regulations to what actually happened, how this event was taking place on Saturday.
Boxing New Zealand is the governing body for amateur and Olympic-style boxing. The Professional Boxing Commission sanctions and officiates professional boxing matches in New Zealand. It's 6:05. Sport. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says Damian McKenzie's playmaking ability and high ball prowess got him the start for this weekend's test against England at Twickenham. McKenzie is at full-back with Ben Smith and Rico Ioane on the wing. England sent up plenty of high kicks in last weekend's win over South Africa, and the All Blacks are expecting much the same. Hansen also wants another first five type player on the field to support Beauden Barrett, and McKenzie fits that bill.
We want to play two playmakers. We think against the sides that play a little differently than we do, having two playmakers makes it a lot harder for them to shut us down.
Steve Hansen, Kautu Unukuafe, will start at prop after Joe Moody was ruled out of the rest of the European tour with a split eyelid. Damian McKenzie is at full-back with Sonny Bill Williams and Jack Goodhue in the midfield. The Black Caps have taken a 1-0 lead in their three-match one-day series against Pakistan with a 47-run win in Game 1 in Abu Dhabi. But the hosts' captain, Sarfraz Ahmed, has criticised New Zealand batsman Ross Taylor for making a disgraceful throwing gesture when facing Mohammad Hafiz. New Zealander Steven Adams and his Oklahoma City Thunder side have made NBA basketball history. The Thunder started the season with no wins from 4 games, but have since won 5 on the trot after downing the Cleveland Cavaliers 95-86 this afternoon. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the BBC investigates big business and food. Alison Balance looks at old age and old ice. Does one help to keep the other fresh? And this week's overseas correspondent Patrick Phelps is on the line from Nanjing, China, where everyday people are wondering what impact its trade war with the United States will have on everyday life. That's on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from Afternoon News at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Watches and warnings are in place for many parts of the country. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mostly cloudy with a few showers. A period of rain spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls in Taranaki and south of Levin. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine and warm today, cloud increasing tomorrow and rain spreading north. For Marlborough and Nelson, scattered rain becoming widespread tomorrow with some heavy falls, then easing to a few showers later. For Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy downpours and possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, rain becoming widespread this evening with some heavy falls, snow lowering to about 500 metres tomorrow morning. Rain and snow easing to a few showers later tomorrow. For Fiordland and Southland, remaining rain easing to a few showers this afternoon, and the Chatham Islands low cloud with light rain tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway has admitted he did not read the whole immigration file before making his controversial decision to grant residency to convicted drug smuggler Carol Schrubeck. Mr Lees-Galloway says while he made the decision in around an hour, he's confident in his decision given the information that was available to him at the time.
I was presented a summary of the file. We went through that. I looked at different aspects of the file. I asked questions about the file, so I can't break that down into different.
You read the summary though. You didn't read the full file.
I read various aspects of the full file.
He said it was a comprehensive file compiled by Immigration New Zealand and he's looked over it in its entirety since. Mr Lees-Galloway declined to be interviewed on Checkpoint tonight, but joining me now is Immigration New Zealand's General Manager Stephen Dunstan.
Good evening, Mr Dunstan. How many pages was the Shrewbeck case file?
I can't really talk about the case in particular, but these files are quite large, at times depending on the number of convictions the person has. And we obviously provide, all the information, for example, the person's immigration history, the details of convictions and any sentencing notes from the judge.
So ballpark, are you talking hundreds of pages or tens of pages?
No, they can be hundreds of pages long. What
was this one hundreds of pages long?
It was a large file, but what we do is we put a case note on top, which just summarises the facts, the person's convictions, immigration history, and we summarise any representations they've chosen to make.
So to be clear, that summary then, on a file of several hundred pages, what would the summary be on a file like Mr Shrewbeck's?
They can be sort of 5 to 7 pages long.
Was it 5 to 7 pages long in this case?
Yeah, well, like I say, I can only talk in the general.
But that's not. That is not the contents. I'm not asking you to divulge the contents here. This is just a number. So how many pages was the summary on the Shrewbeck file?
So generally for complex cases like this one, where there's convictions and quite a few representations, they will be sort of 5 to 8 pages.
So 5 to 8 pages in this case, can we assume?
Yep.
All right. So you say that you look at criminal record convictions. Do you go back and read all the court judgments and sentencing notes, and do you offer a summary of that?
Yes, we do. We get. If they had a conviction, then we summarise what the conviction was and the kind of outcome of that.
Did you do that in this case?
That's a general practice with case notes, yes.
Okay, so what was the advice on the case note that you gave to the Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway?
So that's a good question. So these particular cases are at the absolute discretion of the decision maker, so we don't provide advice. We provide the facts of the case.
So you didn't make a recommendation on this file either way, you just offered the Minister a summary?
We offer ministers a summary, and then when they're considering their case files, and they do this once a week during sitting weeks, and they have often 3 to 5 files before them, and we have some officials in the room who the Minister can ask questions of.
So, did the Minister in this case ask additional questions with relation to Mr Shrewbeck's case?
I believe it's standard practice for all ministers to ask questions, and I believe in this case there were questions asked.
So you provided additional information verbally on this matter?
Yeah, and it's just factual information, usually drawn from the case file.
Have you read the Shrewbeck file?
I have read through the Shrewbeck file, but like I say, I don't want to get into the...
No, I'm just curious. How long did it take you to read that file?
I can't go there.
An hour or more?
I can't go there, sorry.
Why not? Again, that's not contents, that's not personal information. How long did it take you to read the file?
Yeah, I can't, but these files generally vary, so some are less complex, some are
So you've
complex.
said this was complex and there was potentially hundreds of pages, so on average, what would be the reading time for a file like that, do you think?
So the case note on top, as I said, is 5 to 8 pages often. You can read that quite quickly and get a really good summary of the case. The supporting documentation, you'd expect the decision maker to kind of dip into as they need to get clarification on.
So days maybe, not hours? To get through a whole file?
No, I'm not saying it would be days. It would never be days.
So how long did it take you to read the file?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into that sort of material.
Okay, in this case, where there was criminal offending involved, and in cases where there is offending involved, would you provide information on aliases and also travel that had been undertaken by the person?
We provide a summary of what we get from our system, which is their travel in and out of New Zealand, and what our system provides us is their first port of disembarkation, like Singapore, but we don't record where the person travels to from there.
Is that a flaw in the system?
No, it's just the information our system picks up.
I understand it's the information your system picks up, but given what we now know, is that a flaw in your information gathering?
No, I should make the point that we've been running this process for a large number of years now, and sure, there might be improvements we can make to the process, but the same process has been run through multiple ministers over about a decade and a half.
Okay, so, well, here's the thing though. If part of a person's case for remaining in a country is that they would be in danger if they returned to their home country, wouldn't it be pertinent to know specifically if they had been back home?
Like I say, we provide movement records for the person in and out of, and this is a.
But that doesn't answer the critical question, does it? And I'm really sorry to interrupt, but it does not answer the critical question of whether the person in question has returned to their home country if you only record the first port that they turn up at.
Well, that's the information that we have in our systems.
So I'll ask you again: is that a flaw then?
I'm not sure if it's a flaw or not. If we don't run an investigation in these cases, we provide a summary of the facts and any representations the person chooses to make. Okay, so a minister can only make a decision based on what they have in front of them. Are you confident that you placed sufficient information before the minister in order that a well-informed decision could be made? The very comprehensive files that we provide, for example, we provide the reason why they could be deported from New Zealand, the person's immigration history, details of any convictions, the client's personal circumstances. So is that a yes, Mr Dunstan? You think you did provide the minister with everything he needed to make a decision? We provide what we can do in the around the legalness of it, particularly around fairness and. Are you confident your staff did their job as well as they should have in this case? I am confident that my staff do a very good job all the time, and as you're aware, there is an investigation and review of the case, and if there were any elements that were missed, that were picked up in that. But I'm very confident and the quality of the staff that we have doing this work. Appreciate you joining us this evening. Stephen Dunstan, who's the General Manager of Immigration. As we said there, the Minister wouldn't join us for an interview tonight. Donald Trump says he's ready to work with the Democrats after they won control of the US House of Representatives in the midterm elections. But during a combative news conference, he's vowed to adopt a warlike posture if Democrats choose to use their new power in the House to investigate him. During that press conference, Mr Trump labelled the media hostile and accused CNN's Jim Acosta of being a rude and terrible person. The confrontation led to Mr Acosta losing his accreditation and he was banned from the White House. The BBC's John Sopel reports.
The President of the United States.
Not very bloodied and certainly unbowed, Donald Trump was the model of defiance at his post-midterm news conference. Tired, yes, but despite losing the House of Representatives, he was aglow with his own achievements.
I think it was a great victory. I'll be honest. I think it was a great victory. And actually, some of the news this morning was that it was, in fact, a great victory.
Not all the press, though. It's a new political reality, with Democrats now having a powerful oversight role on how the White House operates. Questioned about this, he rounded on the media in general and CNN in particular. It was roughhouse stuff.
That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
In Jim's defense, I've traveled with him and watched him. He's a diligent reporter who busts his butt.
Well, I'm not
like
a big fan of yours either, so
I understand.
To be honest.
But to the Democrats, he offered an olive branch of sorts. Don't investigate me and we can work together, he said. Play nasty and I'll fight back.
So we can look at us, they can look at us, and then we can look at them. And it'll go back and forth, and it'll probably be very good for me politically. I could see it being extremely good politically, because I think I'm better at that game than they are, actually.
Waiting for this freewheeling news conference to end was Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats in the House. She was also making positive noises about working more closely with the White House, but was not offering a blank cheque.
We will strive for bipartisanship. We believe that we have a responsibility to seek common ground where we can. Where we cannot, we must stand our ground.
The Virginia suburbs delivered the first election result and the first upset, a Democrat gain in the House. Was this the much vaunted blue wave that would see Donald Trump's Republicans swept away in a seismic upheaval? It wasn't. In the Senate, it was a very different story. Here, Republicans made net gains. Where Donald Trump had campaigned most, Republicans won, like Senator Ted Cruz in Texas.
This was an election about hope and about the future, and the people of Texas rendered a verdict that we want a future with more jobs and more security and more freedom.
And that left the rock star of these elections, the Democrat Beto O'Rourke, ruining what might have been.
I am as inspired, I'm as hopeful as I have ever been in my life. And tonight's loss does nothing to diminish the way that I feel about Texas or this country.
What these elections have profoundly underlined is just how divided America is, between young and old, between black and white, between men and women, between those in the suburbs and cities and those in the countryside.
John Sopel in Washington there. Meanwhile, the US Attorney General Jeff Sessions has resigned as the country's chief law enforcement officer at Donald Trump's request. Trump announced in a tweet that Sessions' chief of staff, Matt Whitaker, will become the new acting Attorney General. Jeff Sessions has endured more than a year of stinging and personal criticism from Donald Trump over his recusal from the Russia investigation, a disagreement that has finally proved fatal. CNN's Laura Jarrett reports from Washington.
Trump has made no secret of his disdain for his Attorney General.
I'm disappointed in the Attorney General for numerous reasons, but we have an Attorney General. I'm disappointed in the Attorney General for many reasons, and you understand that. Come here, Jeff.
The long-expected departure of one of President Trump's earliest supporters, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, coming after months of blistering attacks.
I said on the Department of Justice I would stay uninvolved. Now, I may get involved at some point if it gets worse.
At one low point, Trump even going so far as to declare, quote, "I don't have an Attorney General."
It's good to be with you.
All because Sessions stepped aside from overseeing the Russia investigation, something that overshadowed nearly all of his 20 months at the Justice Department.
He took the job, and then he said, "I'm going to recuse myself." I said, what kind of a man is this?
And despite all the tweets and withering critiques from his boss,
I put an Attorney General that never took control of the Justice Department, Jeff Sessions, never took control of the Justice Department, and it's a sort of an incredible thing.
Sessions rarely pushed back.
The president speaks his mind. He says what's on his mind at the time, and he's been frustrated about my recusal and other matters, but we have been so pleased and honored to be given the responsibility to execute his agenda at the Department of Justice. Part of that is just this kind of case, and so I am pleased and honored to have that responsibility, and it will do so as long as it's appropriate for me to do so.
Picking his moments carefully and vowing in August that the Justice Department will not be improperly influenced by political considerations. Publicly, he advanced the president's most controversial immigration policies. Privately, a source close to Sessions tells CNN he too has been frustrated that Mueller's investigation is not yet completed. And the Attorney General hopes he will be remembered for never undermining the integrity of the department. With Sessions now gone, his chief of staff, Matt Whitaker, will take over the department in the interim. Whitaker, a former U.S. attorney from Iowa and former CNN contributor, has served as Sessions' right-hand man since September 2017. But with Sessions now gone, the question is, who will replace him?
Laura Jarrett with that report. With more than half of the multi-billion tourist dollars staying in airport gateway cities, some regions are feeling shortchanged. Industry leaders were crunching the numbers at the Tourism Summit Aotearoa in Wellington today to see how remote tourist attractions can get a better slice of the pie and entice visitors away from the main centres. It's all part of the discussion around the industry's 2025 growth strategy. Our tourism reporter Tess Brunton filed this report from the summit.
It's an industry worth an estimated $38 billion, but much of that spending is not reaching the regions. Government figures show 65% of all international tourist dollars don't leave the main gateways of Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, Dunedin and Queenstown. And Venture Southland Tourism and Event Manager Warwick Lowe says that lack of spending puts regions in a bit of a pickle.
There's a bit of a chicken and egg situation really, because you've got to attract people, you've got to have the infrastructure and the superstructure. To invest in infrastructure and superstructure, you've got to have people. And people come for attractions, and we certainly know with the international market and the domestic market, they've got limited time.
But what role does collaboration play in attracting visitors to the regions?
So fundamental. Tourism and tourists don't see boundaries, and we're too small and too fragmented to work individually, and we really can't be competing with each other. We've got to be working together and then getting the opportunities of scale or coordination.
Tourism Waitaki General Manager Margaret Munro says with so many attractive options for tourists, it can be hard for remote hotspots to find their competitive advantage. And she says that's where small to medium-sized tourism operators come in, but it can be hard for them to survive.
There's a whole business aspect behind this for small, medium businesses in tourism that there's not even a conversation going on about at this stage, but they are the coalface of tourism. They are going to grow the industry.
Tourism Bay of Plenty Chief Executive Kristen Dunn spoke on the Leaders Panel about the future of tourism, and she says the fact that tourist spending is so focused on big cities means they can be a victim of their own success.
What we're feeling a little bit from a government funding perspective at the moment is if you're doing too well or sort of seem to be too wealthy, then the investment isn't there or the funding isn't there, and it's going to other more remote areas. But actually the more remote areas are never going to survive unless their regional hub is functioning really well.
The government's new plan for the tourism industry has a heavy focus on sustainability, and Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says that means sharing the spending and tourists across the region. It's not that the regions aren't growing. In the past 4 to 5 years, the industry has grown by about $10 billion, and each region has benefited from that boom. But Mr. Roberts says there's more to be done to ensure the regions hold their market share.
In an ideal world, we'd like to see steady growth in the main tourism centres and spectacular growth in the regions so they can start sharing a bigger piece of the pie.
But Mr. Roberts says it's a mistake to be too idealistic about just how many tourists the regions can draw from those population centres.
There are no easy solutions to make that happen because, hey, look, if you're travelling, you and I or anyone is travelling to France, we're going to go to Paris and we're going to go to see the Eiffel Tower. So there are some must-dos in every destination, and New Zealand's no different.
The industry's 2025 growth strategy is expected to be finalised by March. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, Tēnei.
Boeing has issued a global warning to airlines about potential problems on its 737 MAX 8 aircraft in the wake of last week's fatal crash in Indonesia, which killed 189 people. The aircraft manufacturer has warned pilots about the so-called angle of attack sensors in the plane, which prevent the plane from stalling and diving. The ABC's Indonesia correspondent Anne Barker reports from Jakarta.
At a press conference in Jakarta, Indonesia's most senior transport investigator waved a small model aeroplane in the air to show journalists what had happened to the Lion Air plane that crashed last week, killing all on board. The nose went sharply up, then sharply down, as Suyanto Cahyono illustrated the problems with speed and altitude the plane had apparently had in the minutes before it plunged into the sea. The flight data recorder recovered last week has revealed the plane's airspeed indicator had been faulty for its last 4 flights, and the night before the crash on a flight from Denpasar, a so-called angle of attack sensor had also been playing up, showing a 20-degree discrepancy between the left side of the plane and the right. The sensors provide data crucial for flight control, and an angle that's too high can throw an aircraft into an aerodynamic stall. Though the pilot on the Bali flight had managed to deal with the issue and land safely in Jakarta. Based on his experience, Indonesia's National Transport Safety Commission asked Boeing to issue a global warning to pilots who fly the 737 MAX 8 aircraft. Investigator Nuchayo Utomo says it's crucial such a crash never happens again. If Boeing doesn't have procedures, then how come that flight from Denpasar to Jakarta landed safely? What did the pilot do? He says that's why we're asking Boeing to ensure all pilots in the world, if faced with the same problems, what do they need to do? Boeing has now confirmed it's issued a bulletin around the world, reminding pilots what to do when there's an erroneous reading from an angle of attack sensor. In a statement it says,
"Whenever appropriate, Boeing, as part of its usual processes, issues bulletins or makes recommendations regarding the operation of its aircraft."
Though Boeing hasn't said whether the advice applies only to the 737 MAX 8 or other aircraft models, nor does it reveal whether an erroneous reading could be a fault in the aircraft's design or the result of pilot error. Nuchayo Utomo says investigators are desperate to find the plane's other black box to know exactly what happened in the cockpit on the doomed flight. We know there were discrepancies in the airspeed indicator on the captain's side and on the co-pilot side, so that's why we must find the cockpit voice recorder to hear what they discussed.
Anne Barker reporting there. Before we go, a warning from the police. If you are driving on the Queenstown side of the Crown Ranges, take extra care. Very wet and slippery. There's been 3 accidents in short order. You don't want to be the next.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Immigration Minister admits taking just an hour to decide to let drug smuggler Karel Schrubeck stay in New Zealand and not reading the entire file. National is accusing the government of gagging Police Commissioner Mike Bush after he refused to answer questions on the Wally Homaha inquiry. An investigation has failed to find the leaker of a report into the former Minister Meka Whaitari's alleged bullying, but says Internal Affairs has poor control of security and access. And bad weather has closed schools and roads in parts of the country as high winds and heavy rain caused flooding and disrupted flights. Our next news and weather is at 7.
New approaches to learning are polarising secondary schools.
We actually need to utterly reimagine how we deliver secondary education in this country.
Is it a fad or the future?
You don't want to throw away what is good